When I say drop, I mean drop below baseline. What is dopamine stacking? But be careful about not stacking too many. Certainly there are compounds, both drugs of abuse, food, sex, and certain supplements that can increase dopamine to varying levels and to varying degrees, both healthy and unhealthy. That's all contained in that episode on dopamine, motivation, and drive. But what I pointed out is that if you are somebody who tends to experience difficulty with motivation, that so-called dopamine stacking, as I called it, might be something that you want to avoid. What is dopamine stacking? Dopamine stacking would be combining, a highly caffeinated energy drink that also includes the amino acid tyrosine, which is a precursor to dopamine, plus loud music, plus getting yourself really ramped up, then an intense workout. All of that can be great if you do it every once in a while. But what you will quickly find is that the extent to which your dopamine peaks also dictates the extent to which your dopamine will drop after that peak. And when I say drop, I mean drop below baseline. So a lot of people find that if they stack a lot of things to peak their dopamine, that then they experience a low, and it does take some time for them to return to baseline. And I highly recommend not engaging in activities or consuming compounds that are in an attempt to accelerate that return to baseline, because all it will do is drive that baseline lower and lower. So this requires being able to tolerate a drop in dopamine baseline for a period of time, etc. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up now in the context of this caffeine episode is I just described a study in which using caffeine prior to exercise increases dopamine after exercise. And so you might be saying, especially if you heard that earlier episode, wait, isn't that dopamine stacking? Aren't you encouraging me to stack my dopamine? Well, in some sense, yes, but keep in mind, I'm not suggesting that you do this every time you exercise. So just as in that earlier episode, I emphasized the fact that while stacking multiple stimuli, right, caffeine or energy drinks and music and etc., for exercise or for mental work or for any experience for that matter, is okay to do every once in a while for most people, you don't want to get in the habit of doing it consistently every time you exercise or every time you go out, for instance. And so you really want to be cautious. That is, you want to protect your both baseline levels of dopamine and your peak levels of dopamine. That said, for people that want to experience an increase in mood, alertness, and performance, or who want to condition themselves, because that's really what it is, it's conditioning yourself by the reinforcing effects of dopamine to increase your liking, or maybe even your loving of exercise, occasionally using caffeine or frequently using caffeine prior to exercise is fine. But be very careful. And by being very careful, what I mean is pay attention to how you feel in the hours and days after that dopamine increase wears off. So for instance, if you ingest caffeine and then exercise very intensely and you're feeling great afterwards, but then 8 hours later or the next day you're feeling a little bit low, I suggest you don't go back and do the exact same thing right away. I would give yourself a little bit of time to let that baseline of dopamine return to normal. So again, stacking different things, chemical and behavioral, in order to increase dopamine can be done in a safe way that's beneficial to you depending on your goals. But be careful about not stacking too many stimuli for dopamine too often. That's the key.